What's up, guys? Farah Hanoun here, aka UFC News Alerts, and I'm here to answer all of your questions. I just want to say thank you so much for sending so many through. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can, and at the same time, try to answer the ones that are quite similar. I'll pick kind of the best one from the ones that are quite similar. So let's get straight to it. First question, Conor versus Gaethje. I'm assuming you're asking if that's going to happen. I honestly believe probably not. Right now, obviously, this question came before the news that Conor McGregor had broken his hand. I'm sure you've seen the pictures surface now, so he's probably not going to fight until November. And I honestly believe that Gaethje's not going to wait for that long. People are projecting November. Sorry, I'm saying that like it's a fact. They're projecting that his return will probably be that MSG card in November, although it is said that he'll be ready to fight around July, August. But the important thing to remember with Conor McGregor is there's a lot of negotiation that has to happen with him. It's not just about finding the right opponent. It's about the negotiation process. And a lot of people believe that with the new ESPN Plus deal and the way that you have to buy the pay-per-view through the app, Conor McGregor obviously being the king of pay-per-views for the UFC, it's a little bit complicated, and maybe they're going to have to come up with some deal where he's able to benefit like he used to before. So with Conor, I believe there'll be a lot of negotiation happening, and that could stall the process. In the meantime, the lightweight picture could completely change. I'll get more into that because I'm sure there'll be questions where I could refer back to Conor McGregor, questions about Dustin and Khabib and everything. So once I get to those questions, I'll refer back to my opinion and what I think is going to happen with Conor McGregor. Who'll be replacing Cigano versus Ngannou? It's a nice Cigano versus Ngannou on the main card of 239. It's a good question. I don't think it's been determined yet, but a few options. Maybe Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera. We know the UFC and Dana White are very high on Sean O'Malley. They weren't the featured prelim before. It was Gilbert Melendez and Arnold Allen, because that often doesn't change. The featured prelim never really gets bumped up. So I believe that Melendez and Arnold Allen is going to remain where it is. And I'd say it would be a good opportunity for Sean O'Malley to make his return and open up the pay-per-view main card. So I'd say maybe Sean O'Malley, Chito Vera, or Michael Chiesa, Diego Sanchez is another solid choice. My opinion, I'd say it's one of those two that will get bumped up. Would still make the main card very, very strong. It's still a very good card. Fingers crossed it stays intact. How does Cormier do against Stipe in the rematch? So it's a good question. I believe that Cormier could win the rematch. You know, obviously he won the first fight by knockout. It was in the first round. I would have liked to see the fight go further. Obviously, Stipe was very upset with the way it ended. He got clipped. He got knocked out. I was interested to see what the grappling exchanges were going to be like. We didn't get to see that. I feel like DC is going to push for the wrestling more than Stipe will. I believe Stipe, should the fight get past the first round, I believe that DC is going to push that grind and try to wrestle more than Stipe. I expect Stipe to keep it standing throughout the whole fight. I could be wrong. But I'm just interested in the grappling exchanges. I don't believe anybody's going to be able to take the other one down. Both guys have got phenomenal cardio. Both guys have got really good wrestling. But DC has that wrestling background. So does Stipe, I believe. But like, I feel strategically that DC will try to wrestle. Will he succeed? I don't know. He is very good in the clinch. He did knock out Stipe in the clinch. So that's an important factor. And Stipe is very well aware of that. He said he didn't expect DC to be so strong in the clinch. So I do expect that to be part of DC's game plan, and it will be interesting to see how Stipe approaches that next time they try to clinch up, because obviously he didn't see that shot coming over the ear. So how does Cormier, to answer your question, how does Cormier do? I think he does well. I'm just very interested to see if it goes all 5 rounds, what the fight's going to be like, because both guys have got phenomenal cardio, so I don't see any of them slowing down. So, but to answer your question, I feel like we could see 5 rounds primarily on the feet. It is a heavyweight fight. We could see an early knockout too. That's kind of how all heavyweight fights could be, right? But the great thing about this one, we won't see those latter rounds, the sloppy 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds where sometimes the heavyweights get really tired and their cardio is off and it starts to get a little bit sloppy and they start winging their shots. I don't believe we're going to see that with these two guys. just because they're so well conditioned and accustomed to go 5 rounds. Opinions on Petr Yan. He's a great fighter. He's a great boxer, puts a lot of pressure in his fights. I was very impressed when he beat Douglas Silva de Andrade. He kind of like bullied him down. He kind of did what Douglas usually does in the fights, and he pressured him. Doesn't take his foot off the gas pedal, so he's a lot of fun to watch. He's very technical as well, so he's not one of those sloppy strikers. He's a lot of fun to watch. He's been talking some trash, so I think he's a welcome addition to the bantamweight division because we've seen a bit of a change. Obviously with TJ failing the drug test, and now the title is vacant. You have Cejudo and Marlon Moraes fighting for the vacant title. Cody Garbrandt suffered like 3 losses in a row. He's still very entertaining. He still could be back in the mix with a win. You have Pedro Munoz and Aljamain Sterling who are going to fight. So I think Petr Yan is a very welcome addition to this division, especially right now. And he's got a tough fight against Jimmy Rivera, but he's very confident going in there, and he really believes that he's going to put it on Jimmy. So he's an interesting addition. Not that I'm a huge fan of trash talk or anything like that, but in this sport, especially he doesn't speak English, he's got a translator with him, yet he's making the headlines. So everybody does things their own way, and at the end of the day, if he's talking so much and talking a big game, he's putting pressure on himself. And I like to see that. I like to see how fighters will come out and do after they talk so much. If they deliver, it's great, because then it's like a star is being born. If they don't, they'll get hate, but they know the position they're putting themselves in. And so yeah, I like Petr Yan. I think he's a really exciting fighter and a really exciting addition to the bantamweight division. Ryan Hall versus Khabib, thoughts? I think way too early for Ryan Hall. I mean, obviously you're talking about the stylistic matchup because Ryan Hall's jiu-jitsu is so good and Khabib is such a dominant grappler. But I think Ryan Hall needs more experience before fighting Khabib. I wouldn't want to see that fight now. I'd like to see him fight 2, 3, 4, 5 more guys. He's fighting Darren Elkins, which is a good test. Strong, gritty grappler with phenomenal cardio. So that will be an interesting test for Ryan Hall. So yeah, maybe Ryan Hall down the line, another 3, 4 wins. Sure, it's a great stylistic fight. I just think it's too early for him in his career right now. Where do you think Jon Jones and McGregor will be in 5 years? That's a tough one. Tough one just because these guys kind of get into trouble outside of the octagon as well, and that's kind of slowed down their careers sometimes. I like the path that Jon Jones is going in right now. He's fighting the guy that's next in line, the top contenders. I like that approach that he's doing. You know, he is arguably the greatest of all time, arguably the pound-for-pound best. Obviously, there are certain blemishes because of past issues with USADA and all that, but he is, of course, a very talented fighter. And if he stays on this path, fighting top contender after top contender and knocks them off, kind of like the old style that we used to see with Anderson Silva, where he'd always fight the next guy in line. George St. Pierre would always fight the next guy in line. And they were kind of knocking off all the top contenders. Even if you look back and you look at that top contender and be like, they weren't that good or they didn't deserve the shot. The point is, they were kind of following the ranking system and fighting the next guy in line. And some people like to see that because at the end of the day, if they don't do that, people will complain. If they chase the money fights, the super fights, and all that, people are going to be like, well, you're not fighting the next guy in line. This guy could have beaten him. This guy could have beaten him. And that's the beauty of fighting everybody in your division, right? Because people could look at Johnny Walker and be like, that's the guy to beat Jones. And Jones wants that fight. He's fighting Thiago Santos. He wants, and Rockhold's entering the picture. He's fighting Jan Blachowicz. If he wins that fight, that will catapult him up in the top 10 rankings. So he wants to fight the next guy in line, and I admire his approach. I like his approach at this point in his career. I think it's perfect because he's had those big fights with DC, and I think now to see him like kind of get his stuff together outside of the cage and being active and fighting the next guy in line, I like it. So I like where it's going with Jon Jones. With Conor McGregor, it's not just about the troubles he gets outside of the octagon, it's the negotiation. With Conor, because of what he brings to the sport, the entertainment value, the pay-per-view buys, the money, it's a whole nother level in comparison to the rest of the roster, especially that there's no more Ronda, no more Brock, no more George St. Pierre. Anderson's not in his prime. So there is a massive difference between the numbers that Conor brings and everybody else. Love him or hate him, it's fact. So with Conor, like, unfortunately, I think because he's become such a massive star, we're not going to see him active all the time because he's always pursuing these crazy things. You know, he talks about he fought Floyd, and you never know, he might jump into another boxing fight. With Conor, there's so much that goes into a Conor McGregor fight. So where we see him in 5 years, that's a very tough question to answer. But hopefully we'll see him return to action in 2019. You're the best. Thank you so much. Do you like the change in the Minneapolis headliner? I'm cool with it. JDS Ngannou, that's a great fight. Having it as a main event, it's a great main event. You know, you forget the fact that it was booked on UFC 239. Had they announced that as a headliner, I think everybody would have been happy. So I like it. I'm sure people are upset that it got removed from 239, but I still think 239 is a pretty strong card, even without it. So yeah, I like it. This fight specific, I honestly feel is going to end early. I honestly see this being a first round knockout, if not second round. So if there's any fight I could have pulled out of any card and made a main event of anything, it would have been Cowboy and Tony Ferguson. Just because that fight, I feel like we really need to see 5 rounds of that. But it was added on UFC 238 in Chicago, which is of course headlined by Cejudo Marlon Moraes, co-main Valentina Shevchenko defending against Jessica Ai. 2 great fights, but they wanted to strengthen that pay-per-view, and I understand why they put that fight there. But I think everybody can agree that that fight should have been 5 rounds. And if they could have pulled any fight out of any card, I would have wanted it to be that. But I understand that the UFC were never going to do that because they put that fight on that card to strengthen 238. So they could remove one from 239 just because it's such a strong card. But it's interesting because maybe they could have removed Askren and Masvidal and put that as the main event. But you never know what the fighters are agreeing or disagreeing to. Maybe they tried, maybe they didn't want to. But I'm okay with it. I think it's a great fight. Who's next for Darren Till? Shout out to Wales and England. So you got those flags up. It's a good question. I think Santiago Ponzinibbio is a good fight. Stylistically, it's a good fight. It's striking. I know Till suffered 2 losses, pretty devastating losses, but I like Darren Till. I like his attitude. I like his fighting style. I like his confidence. I think people will always be interested to watch Darren Till. Any confident guy that the UFC are pushing people or any hype train, people like to see that getting derailed. So he's been getting a lot of heat for the way he dropped his last 2, but I think him and Ponzinibbio would be a lot of fun. I know Leon Edwards wanted that fight. Leon Edwards seems to want RDA now. And I understand he's on a 7-fight win streak. He's going to want somebody coming off of a win. Although Darren Till does hold a high ranking. I believe he's top 5 now still. Is he? Maybe. Or maybe after he lost to Masvidal. I'm not sure. Top 10. But I don't think Leon Edwards is that interested in the fight anymore because Till's dropped 2 in a row. But Ponzinibbio seemed like he doesn't mind fighting Darren Till, so I think Ponzinibbio or Leon Edwards would be a next good fight for Darren Till. Any news on a potential Usman-Colby matchup? Well, Kamaru's rehabbing his hand. I believe he's not going to be ready until August, I think. It's got to be Colby. I mean, I find it... The issue with Kamaru's return being postponed is that I believe the winner of Askren Masvidal is going to have a big part to do with who gets the title shot next. Although that's crazy to me because it's got to be Colby, right? What's the point of an interim champion? They've got bad blood. They've gone at it at the buffet line. I don't see how they don't make that fight. But Kamaru keeps talking about the possibility of fighting other guys. He might be just doing that to mess with Colby and show him that I'm the champion, I call the shots. That could be mind games. But I find it hard to believe that the UFC wouldn't put that fight together. And I believe that it would be in August, September maybe. But that's the crazy thing with the sport. Nothing is guaranteed. So if Masvidal goes out there and knocks out Askren in impressive fashion, I wouldn't even be shocked if somehow he got the title shot over. Or if Askren mauls Masvidal and gets the title and is super impressive, I wouldn't even be surprised if Kamaru points at him and they put it together. If the UFC tell Colby, all right, fight in this card, and for some reason Colby can't make it, you saw they did that with him and they passed him up. So I'd say it's going to be Usman Colby around August, September. Just because the turnaround would be too quick for Askren Masvidal from July. That's assuming they don't take any damage in their fight. So I find it hard to believe, unless Usman waits until December. I don't know. It's got to be Colby. In conclusion, it's got to be Colby, and I say August, September. Who's your favorite UFC fighter of all time? That's a tough one. I might go with Anderson Silva just because I remember the excitement of watching him live. There was nothing like watching Anderson Silva live. He puts on a show every time he fights, and when I look back at his performance against Forrest Griffin, I'm not quite sure if I even watched that live, but I definitely watched it. But his performance against Forrest Griffin, watched him fight Vitor Belfort live, literally 2 minutes of just looking at each other, then bam, the front kick to the face. Like every time he goes in there, it's incredible. And his performance against Stephen Bonner, his comeback triangle win over Chael Sonnen, there was a different buzz around Anderson Silva fighting. So I'd probably say Anderson Silva. RDA versus Ponzinibbio, that goes back. Maybe. I mean, Ponzinibbio really wanted that fight for so long, and I never quite understood what happened because I spoke to Ponzinibbio multiple times, and he keeps telling me, like, RDA's ducking me, RDA's ducking me. And then RDA goes, I've never been formally offered Ponzinibbio. Till says Ponzinibbio was offered him and he declined. So each fighter is saying something different. So I don't know what actually happened with all these guys. But I think that fight makes sense because I wouldn't see why RDA wouldn't want to fight Ponzinibbio. He's on a win streak. But then RDA is always looking at that championship. And I'm not quite sure if they make that fight. But that's definitely a possibility. What's next for Kevin Lee? Tough loss to RDA, of course. I think the issue with Kevin Lee is cardio. I mean, we thought his move up to 170 meant that all those cardio issues were going to go. Clearly not. He's got to change something in his training, I believe. I'm not one to tell fighters how to train or anything like that, but I honestly think that there's obviously something wrong with Kevin Lee's training. Something he's got to change. He pushes a frenetic pace, and I said that right when the fight started. I'm like, Michael, the pace that Kevin Lee's pushing, I'm very curious to see if he can keep that up. And the interesting thing is that Kevin Lee keeps getting booked in those main event fights. He fought Ferguson 5 rounds, Barbosa 5 rounds, although the Ferguson fight ended in the second round. But I wonder if it was 3 rounds, if things would change, if we wouldn't see him gas out as much. But he pushes such a frenetic pace, and if you want to be a world champion, you've got to fight those 5 rounds, and he wants to be a world champion, and he believes in himself, and he's a talented fighter. He's a strong grappler, he gets his dominant positions, and he fought Ali Quinta, of course, for 5 rounds. But he seems to slow down every time, and he obviously needs to change something in his training. I'm not quite sure what he's doing wrong, but he moved up to 170 and still kind of gassed out. That pace that he pushes, similar to the Kamaru and Colby pace, where it's strong, like grappling. Khabib as well, pressure, pressure, pressure. Lift your opponent up, stack him against the cage. They defend, you pick them back up. That requires a lot of cardio, so I think Kevin Lee kind of pushes a pace that he's currently not being able to handle. I think he just needs to change some things in training, and we'll see where he goes from there. You think Nate Diaz skips Jorge Askren if he wins? No. For one simple reason, I know Nate's got some star power and stuff, but he's not interested in a Kamaru Usman fight. I highly, highly, highly doubt, for many reasons, that he'd be interested in a Kamaru Usman fight. Stylistically, it's not the fight he's going to want. We all know what Kamaru's going to go out there and do, and Nate isn't going to want that fight. It won't excite him. Nate is in a position in his career where he just wants big money fights, fun fights. The Pettis fight is fun. He knows Pettis is not going to go out there and wrestle him. They're going to strike. They're going to stand and they're going to trade. There's a bit of bad blood between them as well from the past. So obviously it stems back from when Pettis coached The Ultimate Fighter against Gilbert Melendez, when they fought back in UFC 181. Of course, Nate Diaz, good friend, training partner of Gilbert. They had a run-in in UFC Mexico City, I believe. So it stems from way back, Pettis and Diaz. So there's a lot that excites Nate in that regard. Of course, he's still chasing the Conor trilogy. Kamaru doesn't do it for him. There's no personal beef. Nothing against Kamaru. He's obviously a phenomenal fighter, but no personal beef, no storyline, not a big money fight, stylistically not the most fun fight. So I don't believe that he skips that line. Does Conor deserve a rematch? I mean, with the way the fight went, no, to be honest, but is it crazy that the UFC would even entertain the thought of a rematch? Of course not. I mean, at the end of the day, that was the biggest pay-per-view drawing fight in UFC history. The rematch, there's so much to the story. Even if the fight was quite one-sided, there's so much to the story because of everything that happened. First with Khabib approaching Artem, and then the bus incident, and then after the fight, Khabib jumping over the cage. I honestly believe that Khabib jumping over the cage is what even left the door open for a rematch. Even if the door was open this little, that's what left it, because it kind of like showed that it's not over. Does he deserve based on performance and rankings and what happened? No. I mean, when you've got guys like Tony Ferguson and now Gaethje on a win streak, Dustin Poirier, who's the interim champion, you can't say that he deserves. I don't think deserves is the right word. Would the UFC do it? Would I be outraged if they did it? No, because it is the biggest money fight in UFC history, and the rematch is going to be that much bigger. Would you want to jeopardize the biggest money fight in history by booking Khabib, Dustin, and let's say Conor, Gaethje, or whatever? You don't want to do that. But at the end of the day, Conor's got a broken hand right now. Khabib wants to fight. As soon as Ramadan's over, they have UFC Abu Dhabi coming up. I believe that the UFC are in Abu Dhabi because of Khabib right now, and how popular he's become in the Middle East. So all signs point to Khabib Dustin, but it's a crazy sport, and you never know what will happen. But now with Conor McGregor's broken hand, I say we see Khabib Dustin. I believe that there may have been a holdup to making that fight official, because what are you waiting for, right? Like, Dustin's the interim champion. There's no and ifs or buts about it. It's obvious. That's the point of an interim champion. And he beat Max Holloway. Like, there was no gimme fight. But I believe there was a little bit of a holdup. I'm no expert, but I believe that maybe for the slightest chance that maybe they thought they were going to negotiate things with Conor and try to make that rematch. Khabib doesn't want it, but at the same time, is he going to give up the biggest payday of his life? Like, I think he'd have to fight 5 guys in the division, and he wouldn't make as much as he made fighting Conor. It's complicated. You never know what these fighters are thinking, because like Khabib will say, I'm not after money, I'm after like fighting the next guy in line, and then he talks about boxing Floyd Mayweather. It's hard to, like, you can't blame any of these guys at the end of the day. There isn't that much money to be made in the sport. There are a lot of guys who are on 8 to 10 fight win streaks, and they're not making that much money. They're not huge stars. But few people get that opportunity. And after Khabib beat Conor, for him to rematch the guy that he just beat quite easily and potentially make double the money, he's probably thinking, why not? Easy money. But you never know. There's so much that goes on in terms of negotiations and management and whatnot. But now with Conor with the broken hand and UFC Abu Dhabi being set for September 7th, I say we see Khabib Poirier. Do you think Robbie Lawler will find a new opponent? If so, who? Well, they removed him from the card. He said he wants to wait for Tyron. So many people threw their names in the hat. Ponzinibbio did. I believe Leon Edwards did. Elizo Capoeira did. But I think he wants to wait for Tyron. I'm not quite sure if Tyron wants that fight. I don't think he ever wanted that fight. And now that it fell apart, is he, like, I don't know how long his recovery is going to take. Is Robbie really going to wait for Tyron? And he may end up waiting for Tyron, and Tyron may not even want the fight. He may take another fight. So maybe we see Robbie being rebooked for a future card against a different opponent, I believe. John Jones, Cormier 3, who will win and how? It was interesting to see that John Jones interview with Dan Hardy, where he talked about not wanting to fight DC at heavyweight. Excuse me. He said if I fight him for a third time, he wants a light heavyweight. He said I don't want to give DC any advantages, and I appreciated his honesty. I think a lot of people were surprised by that. Obviously, DC, it's a heavyweight cut for him to 205. So fighting at heavyweight, we saw his first fight. Not his first fight. Obviously, he's fought at heavyweight before, but I mean like since becoming champion at 205, moving up to heavyweight and beating Stipe. Obviously, he looked a lot larger from the midsection because he's not killing himself to get to 205. So it's interesting to see Jon Jones say, I don't want to give DC an advantage. At the end of the day, he has nothing to gain by fighting him a third time. It's just because it's the biggest fight in the division for him, whether you're talking about heavyweight or light heavyweight. There's bad blood, there's a big story, there's history. There's an asterisk potentially on his failed drug test for the second fight. So at the end of the day, they do want to make as much money as possible, which is why Jon Jones would even entertain a third fight. If DC was a no-name, there was no bad blood, just some top 15 guy in the roster, he's not going to talk about fighting him again and again. But I think both DC and Jones admit that when they fight each other, they get up extra early in the morning. They train that much harder because they'd rather die than lose to each other. And it brings something extra and something special out of them. And I feel like that's why they'll always be attached to each other and always be open to fighting each other again and again. DC for the obvious reasons. You asked me any match you see headed for UFC 241 in Anaheim. Obviously, Corey Sandhagen and Rafael Sunsao got added. That's a good top 10 bantamweight fight. I could see some more being added. Nothing comes to mind, but I see possibly one or two more big fights. Who do you think is next for Johnny Walker? I mean, Johnny Walker talks about being ready to fight Jones now. I doubt that happens, but I'd rather see them build him a little bit slower than rush him right to Jon Jones. He's an exciting fighter. He's had exciting finishes. He's charismatic. He's a funny, charismatic guy. I say build him up slowly. Trying to think of who could fight him. I mean, if they really want to push him, I say give him the winner of Anthony Smith and Gustafsson. If they really want to push him, then there's Alexander Rakic and Jimmy Manuwa fighting. You have Latifi and Volkan. He could get the winner of any of those because for Volkan, it's going to be tough to get back to that title shot. He's already had it. He suffered a couple of losses. And then you look at Latifi, he's recently suffered a loss. Manuwa as well. Like, these guys suffered a loss, so one win isn't going to get them back to a title shot. So you could throw them in with a Johnny Walker where they will have had solid wins in the division and they would be the toughest test for Johnny Walker. And that could be the guy that gets into the title shot. Then you have a guy like Dominic Reyes, but do you want to put two of the young prospects up against each other? I don't think they do that. Just for fresh blood, for the sake of fresh blood in the division. Thoughts on Greg Hardy being a legit top 10 heavyweight? Does he have potential, you mean? He's athletic, he's got power, he's definitely green, and I like how slowly they're building him up, and I think that's the right way to go about it. But the heavyweight division, you could easily jump into the rankings. It's very top heavy, the heavyweight division, so for him to be top 10 per se, yeah, I think probably one or two wins away he could be in the rankings right away. So I just think they're playing it right with him just because he's so green and inexperienced, but he comes from the NFL. He's got a very athletic background. He's got a lot of power in his hands as well. Those are always two great assets to have in the heavyweight division. Cardio didn't look too great in his last couple of fights, and in the heavyweight division, if you've noticed the people that have become champions and have been able to successfully defend your title, you need that cardio, because if you don't get that quick knockout, then what? So Greg Hardy, I believe, has a long way to go. He's still learning if he can improve his cardio, and if they slowly build him up, then sure, because I don't think the heavyweight division is that stacked. I believe he can jump into the rankings pretty quickly. Who do you think is going to be one champ at 155 by the end of the year? Poirier, Khabib, if they fight in September. Winner of that. I love Dustin Poirier's story. I love everything he represents. I love how he carries himself, his fighting style. Everything he's gone through is phenomenal. I don't think they squeeze in another fight should Tony Ferguson beat Cowboy. Although Khabib says he wants to fight September and December, but it's easy to talk. You never know what will happen in training camp, or if you get banged up in a fight. If they throw Conor's name back at Khabib, should he beat Poirier? If Poirier beats Khabib, does he then get Ferguson? But would they do it in December? So by the end of the year, if you're talking about 2019, it's obviously going to be the winner of Khabib and Poirier. I don't see the lightweight picture changing. Should they book that fight? Other than, like, no championship fights other than that. That's what I meant. When can we expect a main event announcement for the Sacramento card? Soon. I honestly believe it'll be Josh Emmett. I know Uriah Faber's been wanting to come back and fight on that card. Manny Bermudez has thrown his name in the hat, and I don't see Uriah necessarily declining Manny Bermudez. He's an undefeated guy. Uriah is not in the rankings, obviously, because he was retired. But for a guy like Manny, who's a young, undefeated, dangerous guy, a win over Uriah, of course he'll take a fight with Uriah over a ranked opponent just because it would skyrocket his name. And give him that exposure that he's looking for. Does Uriah accept the fight? Is Uriah going to come back? But I don't think Uriah is the main event, especially if he fights Manny Bermudez. Nothing against Manny Bermudez, but I think Josh Emmett maybe can headline. There are rumors flying around that it's Mirsad Bektik. It seems like it's going to be Mirsad Bektik. Nobody else is really available in the top 10. So I believe maybe we see Emmett Bektik. Maybe. Who do you think would win a fight between Zabit and Ortega? That is the rumor right now, that it's Zabit Ortega, which is why I said there's no one available for Emmett, because people are sticking to that rumor, which it could very well happen, Zabit and Ortega. I like that fight. I think it's a very fun, stylistic fight. Ortega's tough. He'll stand in your face, and he'll trade, and he'll make it ugly. Obviously, he's got that insane jiu-jitsu. Zabit is very good on the ground, and he's very slick on the ground. So stylistically, I think it's a very interesting fight, and I think it'll be a war, honest to God, because I don't see Zabit shying away. I believe if anyone draws the war in, it'll be Ortega, because he stands in your face and he trades in the pocket. I think Zabit will be game for that. It's either going to hurt him or benefit him, but I don't see him kind of like running away from a war. Zabit, I believe that if Ortega tries to lure him into standing and trading, he'll engage in the fun striking exchanges, in the wild grappling exchanges. So I see that's a really fun fight. I don't see how that fight could be boring. And it's a tough one to call. I don't give predictions, BTW. That's a... What do you know about UFC in my country, Uruguay? Shout out to Uruguay. I think that Santiago Ponzinibbio headlines. He's always shown interest to headline Latin American cards, and the UFC seemed to push that direction. He does UFC Ahora, which is UFC Now for Spanish. He does broadcast work in Spanish, so he's very in touch with his Latin American roots, despite living in Florida now and training out of American Top Team. He is very in touch with his Hispanic roots, Argentina, Brazil. So he is a perfect guy to have headline the card. Vicente Luque, who's half Chilean, half Brazilian, has expressed interest. He'd be a perfect co-main. So if they can get Santiago versus a top 10 guy, problem is getting that top 10 guy to agree to go to Uruguay. And Ponzinibbio's been dying for a fight. And I remember when he fought Magny in Chile, he was supposed to fight Kamaru Usman in Argentina, in UFC Buenos Aires, and then he got injured. Damian Maia stepped in and fought Kamaru. And then you had UFC Chile, which they put Santiago as the main event. He beat Neil Magny. And I think Neil Magny was probably the only one who accepted to go to Chile and fight him. So it's a bit difficult to get Santiago the top 10 opponent he deserves and somebody that will agree to go to Uruguay. So he's got to make a decision. Does he want that headlining spot no matter what? Or does he want a top 10 guy? Because they may throw a Darren Till at him or Leon Edwards, but Till and Edwards may be like, we don't want to go to Uruguay and fight you. Maybe we want it in Vegas or New York or in Abu Dhabi or wherever. So that'll be interesting. But I do think that he's the guy they're going to want as the headliner. And Vicente as a co-main would be great against any top 10, top 15 guy. So I think if Uruguay ended up with these two, maybe even Yair Rodriguez, but With UFC Mexico City or UFC Mexico being announced, I think maybe they leave Yair for the headlining spot there. That would make perfect sense as well. So we'll see. What's next for Dominic Cruz? It's all about timeline. Definitely a top 10 guy because Cruz is such a big name. He's been champion. He's gone through so much adversity. He came back from long layoff, beat TJ, became champion. So knowing Dominic Cruz, I don't see him at this point in his career, especially that he goes through the process of rehab and being so patient and strong mentally to come back from these injuries to fight. He did that with Takeya Mizugaki because that was a very long layoff. But I don't see him fighting somebody outside the top 10. And there are many options for him. You could throw a Dotson at him. I don't know if Dotson's top 10, maybe he's top 15. But you could throw a Dotson at him. It depends on the timeline of things and where each fighter's at. Because right now the bantamweight division is very active. Of course, you've got Peter Yan, Jimmy Rivera, Aljamain, and Munoz. Cody's not booked. I don't know if they'd want to book that rematch. You've got Cody Stamann and Rob Font. You've got a lot of great bantamweight fights coming up. So Sean O'Malley, Chito Vera. The list goes on and on. So could be anyone. I think it depends when Cruz says I'm ready. I'll probably be able to answer that question better depending on who's available and who fought when and what they did in his last fight. How do you think the UFC should sort the logjam at lightweight? Well, right now, Conor McGregor's out of the picture for now, so I think they should go ahead and just book Khabib Poirier. September, main event, Abu Dhabi. You've got Cowboy and Tony Ferguson. That should be the number one contender fight. Now, with Conor's always going to be there, right? People are going to hate that he may jump the line, but he's the biggest star. They want those big fights. If Poirier beats Khabib, does Conor jump in and fight Poirier? That you can't make that happen. That doesn't even make sense. I know Conor's got a win over Poirier, but there's no... That's happened such a long time ago. There's no bad blood. There's no story. I don't see that happening. I see maybe Conor fighting Diaz. And in that case, if Poirier beats Khabib, then you could have Poirier fight the winner of Cowboy Ferguson, and then Conor could fight a Gaethje or fight a Khabib coming off of a loss, should he lose to Poirier, or a Nate Diaz or whatever it is. But Conor is always going to be there just because of the pay-per-view numbers he gets and stuff, but it's got to make sense. And people are already having a hard time to make sense of a rematch with Khabib, and rightfully so, let alone a fight with Poirier. That's like, sometimes the chips fall into place and somehow the UFC is a promoting machine. Dana White's a promoting machine. They somehow make a storyline and make it make sense. At the end of the day, it's a business, it's a show, it's entertainment. But right now, with Conor out of action, Gaethje's looking for a fight. I don't know who he fights. He's going to have to take somebody lower ranked than him because there's just nobody there for him above him that's available. But I think it's pretty obvious right now. You've got Poirier and Khabib should fight. You've got Ferguson and Cowboy. That should be number one contender fight. And then Conor McGregor, depending when he comes back and who wins, I say we play it from there. Jorge Masvidal, Ben Askren, breakdown on the fight and how you think it will go. You're making me work. Just kidding. It's a very stylistic matchup. Obviously, we all know what Ben Askren wants to come out and do. There's no secret. He knows, we know, his opponent knows. He's going to go out there and try to wrestle Masvidal. Masvidal's got a great wrestling game. I think he's a very underrated wrestler. He's a very good defensive wrestler. He hasn't been taken down that much in his career. He was kind of controlled in the Damian Maia fight. He kind of backpacked him and frustrated him. Wasn't ultimately able to sink in the submission, but it was the takedown for Maia in the third round that made the difference. I think Masvidal made a tactical error that cost him that fight in the third round against Damian Maia. But I think that if Masvidal is able to keep on the feet, I think he pieces Askren up. He's a very good boxer. He's got knockout power. I think people are only realizing how good Masvidal's stand-up is now because he knocked out Darren Till, and Till's a great stand-up fighter, and he had a lot of hype behind him. But anyone who's followed Masvidal back in the day, Tales from the Grind, the backyard fighting, even early in his career, you'll know that he's got serious boxing skills. Probably one of the best pure boxers in the UFC. Very underrated grappling game, submission game, defensive wrestling. So Masvidal has all the tools to win that fight, but you gotta stop the takedown. Ben Askren's relentless. We saw how tough he is. He's got great cardio. He got slammed on his head by Robbie Lawler, and he was able to withstand that, come back from that, and sink in the choke, which, of course, some people believe that Robbie didn't tap. But my point is he was able to come back from that adversity and be very calm and collected about it. Showed a lot of experience, showed a lot of heart. So he's not going to be easy to put away. So that's why I said I wouldn't have minded seeing this as a 5-round fight. I felt like that would have been an interesting 5-round fight, because if Askren successfully takes Masvidal down early, it would have been interesting to see, can Masvidal keep up the cardio and be able to come out fresh. For example, if should he be controlled early, would he be able to come out fresh in the 4th and 5th rounds? Would Askren be able to keep up that style? May not make the most entertaining fight, but it answers a lot of questions, and that's why I would have liked to see that as a 5-round fight. A lot of similar questions, which is why I'm skipping those. Thoughts on adding 165? I honestly thought it was going to happen, but it seems like the UFC don't want it to happen right now. If they do add it, well, it's who would be potential champ. You got a lot of guys that would love 165. Kevin Lee's been talking about it. RDA wants it. Who would be a good 165? You got some 70 pounders that would. I think Colby makes 165 easy. He doesn't even have a 30th weight cut. I think Colby makes lightweight if he wants. So Colby's a guy that I could see being champion at 165. Next opponent for Gaethje, of course, Gaethje wanted Conor. I don't see that happening with Conor being injured, and I don't see Gaethje waiting. Maybe Paul Felder. He called him out in the broadcast table, and he didn't really like that. But I see that as a potential fight because stylistically it's fun, and I think it will appeal to Gaethje because it's stylistically fun. So maybe Paul Felder. Paul Felder fights at 170. I had a little brain freeze. Paul Felder fought Mike Perry at 170. Is he going to stay at... Did I get it mixed up? Was it... It was Paul Felder that called out Gaethje, I think, and in the table. But yeah, he competes at both. I don't know why I just had so many fighters, so many divisions. But yeah, He fought James Vick and he knocked out James Vick at lightweight. He came back to lightweight. That's it. Sorry, my bad. So yeah, it was Paul Felder that called out Justin Gaethje. I think that's an interesting fight to make, just because stylistically it's a lot of fun, and I don't see that many options for Gaethje right now. The Al fight would have been nice, but Al just lost to Cowboy, so I say maybe Paul Felder. Manny Bermudez, 14-0, 3-0 UFC with all finishes before the end of the second round. What does he need to do to get a shot at top 15 guy? His record and finish history shows talent. Shout out to Manny Bermudez because I'm a fan, and Evan is a fan too. What does he need to do? Well, I think if they give him the Uriah Faber fight, should Uriah return in Sacramento, that will do wonders for his career. For multiple reasons, just because Uriah is a staple. He's one of the biggest names in the history of the division, and it'll do a lot for Manny's career should he beat Uriah. And Uriah didn't retire looking bad. Like, he wasn't getting knocked out cold and on a 4-fight losing streak or anything like that. So it'll be impressive for Manny. It's not a ranked opponent because he's obviously retired, but I'd like to see them give him Uriah. Skipping the similar questions. Do you think the flyweight division will still exist in 2020? No. Unless, like, we see a new wave of super exciting talent. And when I say that, they are all very exciting. Maybe I'm leaning more towards the personality aspect. If we see a couple of guys... Because it could be one guy that changes everything. You could have somebody come in and show a lot of personality and maybe the UFC get behind him and the Division 6 run. I honestly think they're playing it by ear. They're literally going event by event. I honestly don't think the UFC even have a plan for the flyweight division. Not canceling it, not keeping it. No plan. They're just going to go with the flow. And if it somehow fizzles out, they're going to be like, well, it fizzled out. And excuse me when I say fizzled out, it all depends on the fights they book and how much they get behind him. You have Cejudo now, who's fighting Marlon. Should he beat Marlon? Is he going to want to cut down to 25 again? It's a strenuous cut for him. Is he going to want to cut down to 25 again? I don't know. So that's the issue. So that's why I think they'll play it fight by fight. If he loses to Marlon, he still has that championship, and he still has guys that want to fight. There's always going to be somebody in the division who wants to fight. So I think they'll go fight by fight. How are you so fast posting MMA news? Well, I appreciate that. I don't have a social life. I'm just kidding, kind of. I just try to keep on top of everything. You gotta stay alert, no pun intended. You gotta stay alert and kind of, I don't know, like there's a certain, you know where to get the news from. There are certain journalists for certain outlets, and I try to break my own news. I try to keep in touch with all the other news that's going on, all the journalists, whether it's local journalists, like local journalists in New Jersey or local journalists in California, and kind of keep tabs on everything, really. What sets MMA aside from all other sports in your opinion? It's a good question. People love a fight. I think people really love a fight. If you notice, if there's a football game and a fight breaks out, everybody watches. If you're in the street and a fight breaks out, everybody stops. Everybody looks out their window. If you're walking, you stop and you watch. There's something about a fight that just appeals to everybody. And I think that's what separates it from every other sport, that people just love to watch a fight. Add on to it when you get attached to the fighters and their story and their background. Add on to it the trash talk and the press conference. There's no sport like it. The build-up, you don't really see the same in football. You can see a big rivalry. You can see Ronaldo, Messi, and of course when they go to head-to-head, it's very exciting. But with fighting, it's like you're talking about beating somebody up. Like, this is the only sport where if somebody annoys you enough, you can beat them up and get paid for it. That's the interesting thing. You could be like, these two football players or these two basketball players hate each other, but what's the worst going to happen? An aggressive, flagrant foul and a technical and an ejection? In fighting, you get paid to beat the crap out of the person you dislike, or you get paid to beat the crap out of somebody just to beat the crap out of them because they want to beat the crap out of you, and you can't let that happen to yourself. So fighting is just, it's different. The training they go through, I think they train harder than any other athlete, and the injuries and how mentally prepared you have to be to get into a fight. Sometimes you see somebody who's so talented, so physically prepared, but then they mentally break. And vice versa, sometimes you see a massive underdog rise to the occasion because mentally they're at a place that we never knew they were at, and they get to show it on fight night. So it's a different sport for sure. Do you play UFC 3? I do not. It's been forever since I've last played video games, unfortunately. How do you think Luke Rockhold will do in light heavyweight? I think the Jan Blachowicz fight is a good test for him because Jan is tough. I think people, if they see the fight on paper and you're not a diehard, but if you don't know much about MMA, you'll look at the fight on paper and be like, well, Rockhold's a former champion in middleweight, easy win for Rockhold. But Jan is very, very tough. He can strike, he can grapple, he's good everywhere. He won't be an easy outing for Rockhold. And I think that's a great first test for Rockhold. And the thing is with Luke, I think he's definitely got the skills to compete at light heavyweight. Very underrated grappler. He's a phenomenal grappler. Great submission game. Great kicking game. So he can strike and he can put guys away with body kicks. He can put guys away with head kicks. He can finish the fight submissions. He can grapple. I just think defensively, he's got to alter some things in the stand-up. Tends to put his hands down too much. He gets clipped a lot. Some people say he's got a bad chin. The thing is, if your hands are down, a clean shot's gonna connect. So it's not only a matter of him having a bad chin. I think defensively, he's got to tighten up a little bit. But he definitely has all the tools to do well at light heavyweight. Do you think that Khabib can hold Dustin on the ground for 5 rounds? Good question. I think he can, but Dustin's not going to make it easy. And the thing about Khabib is he never mentally breaks. Like, you see a lot of guys when they come in with the game plan and they're like, all right, my game plan is to take him down. Oh crap, I can't take him down. What am I going to do now? I have to stand and strike with him. And they kind of like fold under the pressure. Khabib doesn't care. Defend his first 7 takedown attempts. He's still going to go after you. He stays so calm in there. He doesn't care. He sticks to the game plan to a T, and he doesn't care if you defend his takedowns. He'll still go after you. So I'm sure Dustin knows that Khabib is going to come out with a relentless pace. And I think Dustin's got great wrestling. What's interesting to me is that when Dustin fought Holloway, he looked big. I feel like Dustin has really grown into the lightweight frame. Like, he looked wide, and he looked big, and he looked strong. And that's all going to be great against his fight against Khabib, because obviously to defend those takedowns, you're going to, he's a very good wrestler, and he's a good defensive wrestler, but you're going to need that. You're going to need all the strength and all the cardio when you fight a guy like Khabib. So I see him failing a bit in the beginning with the takedowns, but Dustin's got to stay methodical and he's got to stay patient. And I think the problem with Khabib is when he takes you down, he beats you up so bad that when you get back up, all the energy's zapped out of you because he's punching your body and your head and your arms, and he's really grabbing onto you and squeezing, and it really, like, he sucks the life out of people, and it's hard to get back up and fight at a high pace and try to put him away in the latter round. So Khabib's one of those guys, like GSP would take guys down, but he'd kind of be like body, head. He'd slowly transition. It's not the same. Like, Khabib mauls people. He takes them down. He just beats them up. So if they survive the onslaught, it's like it starts to become a mental thing. You have to not mentally break when you fight Khabib. It's like you just got mauled, and you replay that scenario in your head 1,000 times in the practice room, and you're going to be like, that guy can't do that to me. Poirier will grapple with guys like Colby and Masvidal and Romero and whoever he trains with, and he's going to be like, all right, Khabib's not going to do that to me. But then you get into the fight and see that frenetic pace that Khabib pushes, and it's like, can you mentally get up from that in the next round and be effective with your offense and not hesitate and be able to stick to your game plan and all of that. And Iaquinta showed that, which is why people felt like, all right, we saw some holes in Khabib's game. A lot of other people will be like, what are you talking about? It was 50-43. Different opinions. Some people believe Khabib was kind of like toying around with Iaquinta. He wanted to test his stand-up. Everyone else was like, rubbish. He couldn't take him down, so he had to. Obviously, you could look at it 1,000 ways, but the idea was that Iaquinta showed toughness. Excuse me. He showed toughness, and he was able to get back up, and he was able to stand and strike, but you could tell the power wasn't there in his punches. He was in defensive mode a little bit. He had to worry about the takedown, which is why Iaquinta was getting hit so much with Khabib, by Khabib, as opposed to if they were standing in a striking fight, no grappling. I don't think Iaquinta would have gotten hit as much as he did against Khabib, because he wouldn't be worried about the takedown. So for Khabib, the threat of the takedown opens up his striking, and we see him going for the overhand right, in which he did against Conor McGregor and was able to drop him. All right, one more question I'm going to take. What was the first fight that made you fall in love with MMA? This is going to be a very weird answer, and it just kind of happened. I mean, Sun and Silva was the first fight that I followed fully in terms of interviews, press conference, promo, fight lead up. That was the first fight that I watched everything leading up. So when I came to watch that fight, it was an absolute spectacle, especially with what Chael was doing behind the mic and hyping the fight up. It was the first time we see someone trash talk Anderson Silva like that. In that regard, I came in the perfect timing. But I watched MMA before that, and the first fight, I remember, I wouldn't say necessarily this was the first fight, but I remember watching Lyoto and Sokoudjou. That may have been UFC 79 or 77, I'm not quite sure. And I looked at that, and Lyoto in the pre-fight was like speaking in Portuguese. He wasn't speaking English, and he looked like such a nice guy. I'm like, oh my god, this guy's gonna get destroyed, because Sokoudjou looked like an action figure. He looked so strong and muscular, and that's a typical response from somebody who doesn't know anything about MMA. And I didn't know anything about MMA. I looked at it, I'm like, oh my god, that poor guy's gonna get destroyed. And I was talking about Lyoto, And obviously that wasn't the case. So it was interesting to watch that fight and to see kind of how looks can be deceiving kind of thing. It was nice to see someone like nice and quiet like Lyoto and be an absolute killer in the cage. Same thing with George St. Pierre. They weren't your typical fighters like macho, like loud, trash-talking guys. So those were kind of like those guys made me love the sport because I'm like, it's so unassuming. Uriah Faber was one of the first guys that I became a massive fan. I saw him walking in, WEC days, bopping around. I'm like, this guy looks like he's having the time of his life. I'm like, this guy's a fighter. He would come in and he's dancing around and he's the bantamweight division. He was a killer. He was like finishing guys and he'd be dancing around in the cage and like take down and then back up, great grappling exchanges, submissions, guillotine, back up on his feet. It was action-packed and it was a lot of fun and he was so unassuming when you look at him because he's such a happy guy and like always smiling. He looks like a surfer, like a California kid. That's why they called him that. So I like that. I think that's kind of one of the things that drew me into the sport, seeing these unassuming guys go out there and be killers. And I definitely enjoyed that, like early watching those. And then obviously getting into Anderson Silva. He was one of the guys that I became a massive fan of instantly. And then I've got so many favorite fighters. It's a very long list. All right, I got to as many questions as I can. I wanted to keep this under an hour, not to keep it too long. Thank you so much for sending all the questions. Honest to God, you guys sent so many questions through, and I really appreciate that. I think this honestly would have been a 3-hour video if I answered every single one. I try to take the ones that try not to answer too many similar questions, but I really do appreciate you guys sending them through, and hopefully I'll do another one of these soon. Thank you.